Joining us now, Rob Wittman, Republican 1st District of Virginia. That's the Central Virginia area. And he's going to have to make a decision on this also. Congressman Wittman, great to have you with us.
Good to be with you, John, this morning.
Okay, a lot of people upset over this bill, saying that the money for the wall is a facade because there's so many provisions in it that'll stop it from being built. It will never get built. A lot of feedback saying that there are protections now for illegals crossing the border that are so vast that they're going to act like a magnet for getting people in, including housing, bus fare, food, shelter, legal protections, etc. Also, there's a provision in there that says you can now claim asylum for spousal abuse. I don't know how you would even prove that or how that makes. I mean, that would mean that anybody could just come and say they're having spousal abuse. I don't really get that one. And a lot of people upset over it. What say you?
Well, John, I've read through the bill. The provisions there for the use of these dollars, I think, again, allow these dollars to be used. The president, I think, can put those dollars out there. There are some provisions there that they have to consult with local leaders, but it just says consult. The local leaders don't have veto power, and you would expect the federal government to do that. I do believe that there is requirement that the federal government work with localities. So there are those provisions there. They're the same provisions there in the past that are already in the law to say where the wall can't be built. Now, I'm not a big fan of saying you're not going to build it in the near the butterfly, the National Butterfly Sanctuary. I'm not sure how a fence interferes with that. But anyway. But this focuses on the Rio Grande Valley, which is where the issue is. So it does allow the wall to be built. I understand the president's frustration in wanting to get additional funds to be able to do that. I am a little concerned if he's going to military construction accounts to do that, although the military construction accounts he's going to are those provisions for capital investments concerning protecting the nation from drug trafficking. The provisions in there about people pursuing asylum are legal provisions that they would have regardless. It doesn't mean that they're going to be granted asylum. They can make those applications either way. The good element is that it actually puts more dollars in for immigration court judges to actually be there on the border. That's what you want. You want these barriers to funnel people to the ports of entry. You want them, if they're coming to this country, to come here legally, go to the ports of entry, be able, if they're going to apply for asylum, let them apply for asylum, let them be quickly adjudicated. Let them go before an immigration court judge to have their cases decided. You want facilities there where you can, humanely allow these people to be there as they're waiting for their cases to be taken up. But you want those cases to be done quickly. Remember, the provisions right now is you can keep them for only 20 some odd days, and then they have to be released if their cases aren't taken up. So the current situation is unacceptable. The current situation of catch and release is unacceptable. So this I think does make some improvements to it. It is far from perfect. I think there are other things that we need to do along the lines of immigration reform. I know a lot of people are panning those provisions there, but I think that they do move things forward. It's not everything. It's not what was in the Goodlatte bill that I think the House should have passed. And I'll be the first to admit that Republicans had their chance to do this, and the leadership at the time should have whipped and gotten passed Goodlatte 1. There were two Goodlatte bills. Goodlatte 1 was the more inclusive of the bills. I voted in favor of that, didn't vote in favor of the second Goodlatte bill because I thought it had provisions in there. Would have been better to have had that go to the Senate and negotiate from that than where we are with this. This bill is imperfect in a number of ways, but I do think some of the provisions there allow us to get at some of the issues that we have to address. I think the president's right in saying, hey, the border barrier, border wall, whatever you want to call it, absolutely needs to be built. It's the only way that you can create some order in the immigration system. And I think the provisions in there to allow adjudication of these asylum cases makes those things work better. Now, it is far from perfect, but having read it, I looked at it and said that these provisions are things that at least administratively are getting the system closer where it needs to be. Now, there aren't other provisions in there for chain migration, for visa lottery, and all those sorts of elements, which I thought should have been part of it. But this is an appropriations bill, so it didn't get included in it. But it is far from perfect. But I do think that there are provisions in there that are better than the status quo.
Okay, so your colleague from Alabama, Mo Brooks, here's what he said. He's calling on the president to veto the bill, Congressman Wittman, and here's what he says. He says, this bill is an expansion of catch and release. It's a potential doubling of the annual low-skilled foreign workers imported to the U.S. It reduces detention space for border crossers. He says it's an amnesty pipeline for unaccompanied alien children and their relatives. It said you'll never build a wall because there's all these stipulations in it requiring local governments to approve all wall construction. And it said it puts chokeholds on immigration enforcement at the border and in the interior. This just came out a couple of minutes ago while we got on the air from Mo Brooks in Alabama. Good guy.
Sure. Well, listen, I've read the bill. It does provide for local officials to comment, but local officials can't veto this, so they give them a period of time to comment. And you would want local governments who you are going to be affecting their areas to be able to comment on this, but it doesn't give them veto power over this. The provisions in there about guest workers is the legal program that we want people to come to the country. Here in Virginia, especially in the seafood industry across the 1st District, those companies need those workers. They come here legally. They come from the country of origin. They come through the consulate. They work here for the year or for part of the year, excuse me, and then they go back. That's the legal means by which we need to do this. There's a quota as to how many of these workers can come into the United States. The quotas are exceptionally low. The seafood industry, which this was actually originally created for, many times are pushed out of this because you can't apply for your workers more than a certain period of time before you need the workers. So they get outcompeted by the landscape industry and others that are using these workers. And remember, it's not like you're displacing U.S. workers on this. These are seasonal jobs that are unfilled. You have to prove that there's not a labor force available here to go into those jobs. This is all done legally. The provisions there for the additional numbers are the extending the cap, and the Secretary of Homeland Security is allowed to put those additional provisions in place. Now, last year, there were only 15,000 additional slots opened up for that. So once they got to the quota, it's done by a lottery, which I think is ridiculous that you actually draw for these workers via lottery. But if you're a business, let's say you're a seafood business in Virginia, and you need these workers to pick crabs or to cut fish or to shuck oysters, and again, it's a season, so you can't do that all year long, and there just aren't folks out there that want to work part-time and do piecemeal work. So you apply for those workers in a visa program, and if you don't, in a lottery program, and if you don't get selected, then you don't get your workers. And if you don't get your workers, then these businesses go out of business. So it does provide for U.S. jobs, and we have fought to try to have some long-term stability for that program. So, and as far as there being a flood of workers coming in under that, there are a finite number of jobs. They are limited to those particular industries where you demonstrate that you can't get workers here, that it's seasonal work, and that guest worker program is a legal means by which people come here. They come here with a work visa. So I want to make sure we're encouraging people to do it legally, and then those people have to go back home. So it's not like they have a resident status here or anything other than just a temporary work visa. So I think those provisions are things that are that are necessary with this. I know certainly for Virginia it's a big deal, especially in my district, because there are dozens and dozens of seafood industry businesses that rely on these, as well as others. There's other seasonal businesses that rely on this, landscaping, lawn work, those sorts of things. So I think the provisions there are reasonable to make that system work. Now, listen, this bill is far from perfect. It would not be what I would put together as the solution to this nation's immigration problems. But I do think it's moving things in the right direction.
All right, so Congressman, look, we had a caller, Mike in Chesapeake, a few moments ago before you got on, Congressman Wittman, who basically said the same thing about the expansion of the HB2 visa program. He's like, look, rhetoric aside, he said it's capped out, and he said I have to decrease the size of my business this summer by half because I'm not going to get the workers. And I can't get American workers, and they don't want to work 5 days a week, and they don't want to work outside in the sun, and it doesn't matter what I pay them, they don't want to work. So I have to downsize my business as a result of the cap that I can no longer get the labor I need in order to grow my business. And he says he pays them between $12.75 and $15 an hour. Plus, he says you have to pay the government money to get them here and all that, pay their, I guess, travel and stuff. So, okay, I'll take that. I mean, look, I'm not in the business they are, so I understand that, and I'll take your word on that. But let's get to the national emergency. I mean, look, in this bill, there's a lot of provisions that when you look at them, it's like, okay, these are things that will encourage additional illegals to come to the United States because there's built-in protections, right? So we get that. Now the president says today, along with signing it, he's going to declare a national emergency, and they've identified another $8 billion. Here's my fear. This is going to get struck down in 72 hours by the Ninth Circuit. We've been down this path 100 times. So is this real, or is just a PR ploy to say, yeah, we tried to do something?
You mean the president's declaration of a national emergency?
Absolutely, Dr. Wittman, yes.
Well, listen, I think the president clearly has the authority to do that. My concern is always about executive action. I think Congress, this is clearly a role for Congress. As I said before, Republicans, when we were in the majority, had an opportunity to do the right thing, and we didn't do it. And I'm going to stand there and say, listen, that was a missed opportunity that Republicans should have done. I understand the president's frustration. I understand, too, the president said, this is what I am going to do, and I am going to use every means by which to do that. And that's exactly what he's going to do. You're right. There will be an immediate suit that will be filed in the Ninth Circuit. The Ninth Circuit, as we've seen, has a particular viewpoint and will most likely stay the president's action, and of course, then it'll have to work its way through the courts. My concern always too is in an allocation of funding. That's a Article 1 provision. Now, the president is correct. There are certain elements of his authority under Article 2 that he can do in moving existing monies around that are already appropriated in certain ways. So what he's going to do is to do that, which the legislative branch does give the executive branch some flexibility in how these dollars are to be spent. It's not so restrictive or so prescriptive that he can't do these things. Now, that doesn't mean he won't be challenged. It doesn't mean that it won't be tied up in the courts for a while. But ultimately, he's using everything in his toolbox to be able to do that. But I still go back to the situation, John, where this is a congressional responsibility, and I think the president has made this a national issue, which I do think it needs to be. I think we need to solve this immigration issue. It's been going on now for almost 30 years without any sort of resolution to it. The bill that passed yesterday is far, far short of anything close to what we need to do. Now, I would argue there are provisions in there that do make things better. You can argue how much better that is, or marginal, or even if it does. But at the end of the day, what I think you have to give the president credit for is that he's saying, this is an important issue. I'm going to make sure that this nation addresses the issue. I'm going to do it as the chief executive of the country. I'm going to run the country the way it's supposed to be run, in the ways that I have promised I would address the issue. He has pushed Congress to do this, and this effort going forward, would not have gained the national attention. And remember, too, look at how the American people are feeling about this, about barriers. I mean, there are more and more Americans now that look at this and say, yes, barriers are a part of immigration border or immigration efforts to secure or immigration reform efforts to secure the border. So, I think the president is doing everything that he possibly can to make sure that this issue gets addressed, imperfectly as it is, and make sure that there's a solution there that actually gets after this instead of allowing the problem to get worse, to actually try to make some changes to make things better.
Should the president sign the bill, Congressman Rob Wittman?
That'll be up to him. The Congress has done its job. He has indicated earlier on that he will. Time will tell. So we'll see.
Congressman Rob Wittman, I want to thank you for your time today and your hard work and calming things down a little bit. Obviously, a lot of us upset over a lot of the provisions in this that took us by surprise, but we'll see what happens. I think the president should definitely go ahead and declare a national emergency, let the chips fall where they may, try to get that money. But, here's the problem, Congressman. We've been burned so many times. The scars run deep here. And so there's just a general mistrust about whatever you guys do in there, that at the end of the day, we're going to get screwed. It's basically what this comes down to. And I in no means, Dr. Wittman, I love you to death. I'm not being disrespectful. But just a reflection of our callers is that, whatever they do up there, it's not going to be what you think it is. And we're going to get screwed. And so I hear where you're coming from, and hopefully there's a longer term plan here. But a lot of people are concerned about the fact that it looks like some provisions in this bill really open up the door for encouraging additional illegal migration into the United States, because it gives those that are come here illegally, we keep giving them additional protections, which is, it's hard for the average person getting up every day and putting in 10, 12 hours a day to make ends meet for his family, and then he's got to pay for this. Tough to fathom. Does that make sense?
It does, yes. Listen, I fully understand people looking at the bill and saying, "Hey, listen, there are elements here that are problematic." At the bottom line with this is all about the Department of Homeland Security and the efforts that they pursue in implementing this. And I believe that the elements in the bill that allow for the resources necessary to make sure that we get people to these ports of entry, that they're processed there, and if you have a claim for asylum, it's properly adjudicated quickly, and that if it is determined that you have a legitimate claim and you're given temporary protective status, that at least that there's a legal status for that. Now, we can argue what those provisions should be and how broad they should be. And listen, that's legitimate. That's a legitimate concern about this. And I think that there are always efforts for both administratively for DHS to say, well, this is how we are going to implement this. Remember, they can be very focused on how they implement this. So I think that those provisions are there. But listen, I do understand people's concerns, and John, I understand too. People look at this and go, hey, listen, in the past these things have happened, and they haven't turned out the way that we would have liked for them to turn out. But it's up to Congress, members of Congress, myself and others, to make sure that we are defining these policies and making sure that this is improving our immigration system and making sure that it's orderly and making sure that we don't have chaos with massive amounts of people coming across the border and all the elements that go along with the problems associated with that.
Congressman Wittman, thank you. Thank you for your candor. Thank you for being with us. More information, go to whitman.house.gov.